Hello world, this is Chris. Today we're in the lab area on the workbench here doing a little bit of electrical safety modifications. So as you can see here in front is an older connection here for a power strip that we have right on the wall. So it is a slightly older power strip, and since this plug is also older, we have some fraying here at the end. I started cutting the end off, and I figured it'd be beneficial to do a little video so everybody can kind of see how this works. So as I mentioned, this is the old plug, and all we really need to do is remove this. Since this is a molded plastic end, we can't reutilize this. We just need to get rid of it. And the issue that we were having is the end of this wire, as you can see here, was starting to fray. In the center, you have your ground line, and then on the two sides, you have your hot, and then here the neutral. Let's see if we can expose the neutral a little bit more. So that is the neutral side. That's what's typically going to have the white shielding, and here's the hot side, and that has the black shielding. So let's see if we can strip this back a little bit more. And they do have that ground in the middle. This is a little bit of a separation, and like I mentioned, we had the fraying on really on both sides, and that's not something that we want to have plugged in with the potential of those two wires touching each other. We could have sparks, we could have the wires could simply fray, they could touch each other, they could melt. There's all kinds of things that can come up, and that's not something that you want. So let's strip this back a little bit more. Okay, so I want to show here, this is what the old end looks like. So what you could see is the wires just go directly in there. And as I had mentioned previously, the two sides here were fraying. That comes from people potentially just pulling on the wire as opposed to pulling on the end like you're supposed to, or just from the wire kind of moving around a lot. And that will happen in age. A lot of things can happen with these wires as they get older. That's why it's always good to inspect them. Now what you can see here, is the replacement end. So what this is this is going to be an end that I'm going to be able to completely disassemble, gain access to the terminals on the inside of this end, and by doing that, I will be able to actually put the wires directly into the new end and utilize that new end, so I don't have to worry about my frayed lines anymore. So I can entirely strip back and get rid of the old wires, and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. If those wires, being that neutral and the hot, or even the ground and the hot, if they were to touch one another, that's where the sparking would come from. That's what's called a short circuit when those wires touch, and that can potentially cause a fire, that can cause damage to your equipment, that can cause damage to your internal wiring. So if your breaker does not pop, so the purpose of the breaker is to actually realize that too much amperage is being drawn. If you have two wires directly connecting each other, then that is a short circuit, and it would typically should cause the breaker to pop, because that's way more than the circuit can handle. Now typically this is going to be plugged into either a 15 or a 20 amp circuit, but if you do have it in a higher amperage circuit, then you can have a even larger problem. And simply that larger problem is just that breaker won't pop. If you have the breaker that doesn't pop, and that breaker popping is kind of that safety feature. If that does not happen, then that's where you start getting into even more structural problems. So I'm just stripping some of the ends away here so we can see what we have once we actually have it exposed. So now I've got the three ends entirely stripped back, and you can see this is a aluminum conductor. So a lot of times in wiring you'll see copper, and this is not that. This is the aluminum conductor, so you can't quite get as much amperage through this. Let me see if it actually says something on it. We do have 16 gauge, and it notes green conductor for ground. That's that centerpiece is that ground. So a lot of times on these wires, if you look at the wire itself, which you can see right there, it does have some information on it as far as what type of wire it is, what gauge it is. Sometimes it'll give different ratings as far as what kind of code it can potentially qualify for. There's a lot of information that can be read or learned just from reading the side of your cable. You can notice that with not only electrical cable like Romex cable, but you can see that a lot of times with your networking cable. You can even see that with speaker cable. It a lot of times will show the gauge. So if you look for a number in AWG, for example, that is your gauge of your wire. And typically the higher gauge the wire, being the lower number, you can get more amps through it. So that's one thing that's kind of interesting, is really the lower the number you go, the thicker the cable it is, all the way down to 0. And then the lower that number means the higher the gauge, and in turn the more amperage you can draw through it. So here, as you noticed, I have these 3 prongs to replace the 3 prong on this plug. So let's open this guy up, and this is just a simple 3-prong replacement connector you can get from just about any hardware store. I believe I got this from our local Menards. We'll open this up here, and here it is. And I mentioned I could take this apart, so you see here the screws, and then you have screws here at the end. So what I'll do is, this is the clamp to clamp on to this conductor, and then here is what allows me to remove the actual head of this. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a screwdriver, and we will remove the clamp portion. Now this is usually a pretty coarse thread, allowing for less turns to get the screw out. So notice that coarser thread right there going through the plastic. 2 holding down, 1 on each side. Now something to think about too when you do put this back together is you don't want to tighten one side all the way down before you start the other side, because it can end up at a slight diagonal. For example, let me show you this. Say we do not want to have a clamp down a wire in this orientation. We want to clamp smooth and straight right down perpendicular across that wire, so you're able to distribute that force all the way across the shielding. Get this last one out, and we'll be able to show you what that looks like where the wire goes in. So that's where your wire is going to be going in the connection itself. You can pull off the bottom here. And then you see on the inside of this connector is the actual terminals for the wire. So then we have these 3 screws that need to then come out. And these again are coarser thread. They do look like just regular old wood screws, but obviously we're going into plastic here. A lot of times your wood and your plastic threading will be quite similar. Whereas you can see some of the machine screws are a lot more fine, because it's just going into a machined metallic nut or metal itself. So let's take a look at what we have here. So on here we have the 3 contacts. You have your ground, and you can see that indicated with the black. And then we have, indicated with the green. And then you have your black and your silver. Your black will typically be your hot, and your silver being your neutral. And for the sake of it, we can also look and see if we have that indicated in the directions. And a lot of times when you buy these plugs, they do come with some information. It should show you its amperage capability, as well as some information as far as how to connect it. Now you see right here just some of the information as far as how far to strip it back. Let's see, right here it shows 125 volt AC, so that's voltage alternating current, by 15A, so that's 15 amp, so that's your 15 amperage. Wire capacity, 16 gauge, 3 wire round jacket, and then some of the NEMA rating. Notice right here it says green wire to green terminal pocket, white wire to white terminal pocket, black wire to brass terminal pocket. Okay, so we'll look at this. We've got our silver, we've got our black, and we've got our green. So we should be able to plug that right in. Now it does mention the directions. Now this is something that I'm not going to necessarily follow. It does show tighten terminal screws to 20 inch-pound. That is a very detailed piece that I am not going to follow. I basically just tighten it down to where I can tell it's good and tight, and I go from there. So notice I stripped these back, but my stripping is quite a bit more than what I can even fit in here. So what I will do is trim this back a little bit more, and I certainly would prefer to have a little bit longer than too short. So I'm going to trim it back just so it barely just goes into this. We don't want to have a lot of this exposed. Like if I use this, for example, then you have all of this exposed contact here, or this exposed wire that could potentially touch another wire, and we end up with the same problem that we were trying to avoid from the start. So I'm going to go ahead and strip back a little bit of this. Cut back a little bit of this. And then I will put it up against it, just the same as I did before, and see how it'll sit. Yep, that basically will sit just right into that. And I'll do the same thing with my other side. Cut that so I don't have a lot of extra wire exposed inside my connector. And again, same thing. It will rest just in there perfectly. Now I do, so we don't have the wire strained, and strangely, I will peel back that ground, or strip back that ground to be just about the same. That way all the wires are even inside there. Alright, so notice I stripped it back, and I'm twisting it. I always like to twist mine to the right, and then I'm going to cut back just as I did with the neutral and the hot, so there's not extra wire hanging out there. Cut, and then we'll do a double check, and it does fit in there just right. Okay, so now it's just going to be a matter of loosening these terminal screws and then attaching the wire into your terminal screws. Loosen that up, and if you should be able to see here, notice I just mentioned the difference between machine and coarse grade or coarse threading here. So you can see how that threading is a lot closer together because we are going through and into this actual metal here. So this post, the internal post that actually goes all the way out here, has this threaded hole that you can see the screw itself is actually going through. So that's what is allowing the current to pass from the wire to the post here. Is this actually threaded directly into that, and we're smushing the wire between that post and this plate by utilizing that screw. Loosen this one up. And if you watch the inside, you can make sure you don't pull it all the way out. And if the screw does come out too far, you can always just re-thread it in. Okay. So I do want to put my neutral on the silver. Get this to disconnect here. There it goes. Get that to seat in. I'll twist it in the same orientation that I have the twist, just to make it get in there a touch further. And then tighten it down. And then I'll take my hot, move the ground out of the way, do the same thing on the hot side, twist, get that to set in. That one went in a lot easier, so I don't need to twist the unit itself. Clamp that down, and then we have the neutral. I'm sorry, we have the ground here with the green side. Slide that right in, tighten that down as well, and now we have the new connector. Now I have all those done. I'm just going to go around again, just double check, make sure they're all tight, so nothing's going to loosen up. And there we have it. Alright, so now it's just a matter of putting this back together. I'm making sure everything is good and tight, and I'll go around and just double check here. So you want all these terminals tight because we don't want to take this apart again. And again, when we put this back together, the important aspect to remember is we need to pull on the end. We're not yanking on the cable. Okay, so I'll bring up the other end. And these do go in one certain way. So as you notice that it's basically a triangle here, and we need to match that up. There we are. Now that is connected, we can take these screws and put them back in. I do really like these replacement ends. I've put these on a number of different cables, It's a great way to revitalize your electrical cable. A lot of times you'll have the same type of a fraying with extension cords, a lot of different types of cabling that the wire itself is still plenty good. It's just the end that has gone bad, and you do not want to continue to use those ends when those wires are frayed. As I mentioned, it can cause a lot of problems for you. So we tighten these down. Okay, everything is back connected. So we just need to put the bottom in. Orientation wise, it looks to be the same on both. Pop that together. Okay. Now you can see with this type of a cable, you can still see the ground popping through because I did strip it back a little ways. That's not really a concern for me with where I'm going to be using this. I might just add some electrical tape to the end of that. But you notice here now I'm clamping this back down. I'm getting to the point where the plastic is engaging. I'm going to go to the next one so we get it to be equally tight on both sides. So now notice it is straight down, and I am clamping directly on that shielding here. Now I'm increasing the pressure with this little clamp piece here by tightening down the screws on both sides. Cycle back one more time. Tighten that down, and now we'll tighten this down. So here the benefit is, again, is the tension. As you do pull on this wire, the tension goes to this piece. The tension does not go to the contacts that's inside of our plastic piece here. If you do yank on this, or someone trips on it, whatever it may be, the tension goes into this plastic tension point as opposed to our contact. But now we have a fixed cable here, so I can plug this right in and we'll have power. So the comparison, this is the old one. Obviously it is physically larger. That's not really an issue. What matters the most is we just have these prongs that are coming out. We do have a physically larger piece, and again, it should be able to be pretty easy just to plug this in and unplug it. One thing to note, when you do plug this in, you don't want to wrap your fingers around the end at all. You do want to keep your fingers away from the prongs themselves, because if you do touch these as you plug it in, you will get electrocuted. Might not actually kill you, but it'll give you a little bit of a shock and a really nice flavor on your tongue. So hopefully you learned something. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe below. Have a great day.